Hello, everybody. This is Menopause Taylor bringing you the state of menopause in the world today. Welcome to this podcast on something that's new and different. We have just finished a bunch of podcasts on what happens at menopause with themes that all are involved in menopause, and I showed you how things are similar to one another. These WHAM podcasts grouped occurrences according to similarities. And today's podcast isn't a theme on similarities. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's going to be about differences. In this little podcast tutorial, I'm going to compare and contrast osteoarthritis with osteoporosis. You see, these are two terms and two diseases that sound similar, but they are quite different. So I think it's important to discuss the differences and do them side by side, because the consequences of confusing these two diseases can be really profound. If you've ever heard of either of these terms, you need to listen to this podcast. If you have one of these diseases, you need to listen to this podcast. If you're vague about either of these diseases, you need to listen to this podcast. So let's delve into the differences between them, because everybody needs this. My goal is going to be to point out all the differences between the two. So what I'm going to do is address this by category. And I will compare all of the following. First, their definitions, then their locations, then their causes, then their symptoms, then their progression, then their diagnosis, then their treatment, then their prevention, and then their management. So let's start with definitions. Do you already know the differences in their definitions? If I gave you a question and said, by definition, osteoarthritis and osteoporosis differ in that A, osteoarthritis involves breakdown of cartilage, whereas osteoporosis involves breakdown of collagen. Or B, osteoarthritis involves loss of bone mass, whereas osteoporosis involves breakdown of cartilage. Or C, osteoarthritis involves breakdown of cartilage, whereas osteoporosis involves loss of bone mass. Or D, osteoarthritis involves breakdown of collagen, whereas osteoporosis involves loss of cartilage. Which is it tricky? You see, this should be really easy, but it all depends on whether or not you know the differences in the definitions of these two diseases, and most people do not. So the answer is that osteoarthritis involves breakdown of cartilage, whereas osteoporosis involves loss of bone mass. That was answer C. So the definition of osteoarthritis is this. Osteoarthritis is chronic breakdown of the cartilage in your joints, leading to pain, stiffness, and swelling. And the definition of osteoporosis is loss of bone mass, making your bones porous, fragile, brittle, and prone to fracture. See, this is a very critical difference. Osteoarthritis is all about cartilage. Osteoporosis is all about bone mass. And that actually brings us to the next distinction in our list of things to discuss, location. Now, location's a big deal. Osteoarthritis occurs in the space between two bones. The problem with osteoarthritis is in the space where two bones meet. But osteoporosis occurs within a single bone itself. So with osteoporosis, the problem is not in your joints. It's in the bone itself. There's a big difference in the two. Osteoporosis has nothing to do with the joint space between the bones. Now, there are many different ways to express this distinction between the location of osteoarthritis and the location of osteoporosis. You could describe the difference as outer bone versus inner bone, or interbone versus intrabone. Inter means between, intra means within. Or you can just say between bones versus within bones. They are all valid ways of describing the differences in the location. So use whichever one you want, but just be sure you remember the difference. Now, imagine right now a door hinge. Imagine a rusty door hinge. That is the perfect demonstration for osteoarthritis. You know how rust builds up in the space in a door hinge? It's like rust has built up in the joint space. It's the area between the actual door and the door frame. When a door hinge gets rusty, the door doesn't move as easily. And the problem is not with the door itself. It's the hinge that connects the door to the door frame. Well, that's exactly what happens with osteoarthritis. The difference is that instead of rust, you build up particles of cartilage. And just like the rust in a door hinge, the cartilage clogs the joint so that it can't move smoothly. So the more cartilage that breaks down, the worse the situation. So if particles of cartilage collect in the space between the bones that form your knee joints, it becomes difficult to move your knee, and your knee is stiff, and movement hurts. But osteoporosis is different. It has nothing to do with the joint. It's all about the bone itself. And so osteoporosis is where the quantity of your bone decreases. Instead of having bone that is very dense and with little teeny weeny holes, the holes get bigger. So osteoarthritis is buildup of cartilage in your joints between two bones, whereas osteoporosis is loss of bone within the actual bone. And there's another distinction between osteoarthritis and osteoporosis that pertains to location. It has to do with which bones in your body are most affected by each disease. Osteoarthritis is more common in your fingers, toes, and knees. It's less common in your hips and spine. But osteoporosis is most common in your hips and spine, and also your wrist. So, can you have both osteoarthritis and osteoporosis? Well, of course you can. And if that's the case, the bone itself is less dense, which is osteoporosis. But the space where the bone meets another bone is also damaged with cartilage clogging the joint, which is osteoarthritis. Okay, the next difference in the two is causes. We're going to talk about the difference in causes of osteoarthritis versus osteoporosis. See if you can answer this quiz question. Which of the following is not a cause of osteoarthritis? A, wear and tear on your joints. B, overuse of your joints. C, injury to your joints. D, weight loss. E, joint inflammation. This one's easy, right? The answer is weight loss. Weight loss is not a cause of osteoarthritis. The very opposite is true. Weight gain causes osteoarthritis. Why? Because it puts more wear and tear on your joints. So osteoarthritis is caused by all of the following: wear and tear on your joints, overuse of your joints, injury to your joints, excess weight on your joints, and inflammation of your joints. There are also genetic factors that can contribute to osteoarthritis. But osteoporosis has different causes. It's due to anything that results in bone loss. And this includes all of the following: estrogen loss, smoking, excessive caffeine, excessive alcohol, chronic excessive exercise, anorexia or bulimia, diabetes, thyroid disease, vitamin D deficiency, and steroid use. So the causes of osteoporosis are things that decrease the quantity of your bone. Osteoarthritis has nothing to do with the quantity of your bone. It's caused by things that affect the joint space. Okay, next we have symptoms. Time for another quiz question. Which of the following are early symptoms of osteoporosis? A, bone pain. B, muscle strain. C, stiff joints. D, hump back. E, back pain. F, poor posture. G, none of the above. H, all of the above. Now, don't be fooled. This question is about the symptoms of osteoporosis, not osteoarthritis. If you're like most women, you guessed all of the above. But that's wrong. It's just the opposite. It's none of the above. Osteoarthritis produces all sorts of symptoms early, late, and all the time in between. The big problem with osteoporosis, though, is that there are no early symptoms. You just sustain a fracture. Wham! Are you starting to see just how different these two diseases are? Do you see how detrimental it can be to confuse the two? Okay, now we move to the diagnosis of these two diseases. For osteoarthritis, the diagnosis consists of noticing your symptoms of joint pain, stiffness, and swelling, and getting an x-ray that shows joint damage. But the diagnosis of osteoporosis is more difficult. There are no symptoms, so unless you just sustain a fracture, you need a bone density test to determine if you've lost bone. Getting a bone density test when you begin post-menopause is absolutely critical because it provides a baseline for future comparison, or it might reveal osteoporosis early before you actually fracture something. Okay, now for the differences in the progression of these two diseases. First, we'll do osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis can begin at any age, but it is very common at the time of menopause, and it commonly starts then for a variety of reasons. And once it starts, it's chronic. That means it gets worse over time, but it's obvious that it's getting worse. Your joints get stiffer, they hurt more, your mobility decreases. But the progression is quite variable from one person to another, and that's because you can control many of the factors that cause progression of osteoarthritis, which include how much wear and tear you put on your joints, how much you overuse your joints, how many injuries your joints endure, how much weight you gain, and how much you do to decrease your joint inflammation. Some joints may become so damaged that they have to be replaced with artificial joints, and that's why so many people have knee replacements and hip replacements. But the typical osteoporosis of menopause, on the other hand, begins at the time you lose your estrogen, period. And unless you do something to prevent bone loss, the progression of osteoporosis is very, very predictable. With no measures to prevent bone loss, you will lose 2% of your bone per year in the first 5 years after losing your estrogen. And then you will lose 1% every year after that, purely because you lost your estrogen. So the progression of osteoarthritis is much more obvious, and you can do a lot to monitor and modify it. But the progression of osteoporosis is silent. You don't know you have it until you sustain a fracture. And the treatments for these two diseases differ too. You treat osteoarthritis with anti-inflammatories and steroids, but steroids can cause osteoporosis. You treat osteoporosis by doing something to replace bone, with options being either estrogen or one of the selective estrogen receptor modulators, or SERMs, that I've talked about in previous podcasts. But better than any kind of treatment is prevention. And you can prevent osteoarthritis by doing the things I mentioned earlier. Put less wear and tear on your joints. Avoid overusing your joints. Avoid injury to your joints. And avoid weight gain. And you can prevent osteoporosis by either taking estrogen or a SERM. Now,